You know, as someone that was there during the Smash 4 days, can I just say, like, Smash 4 is kind of revolutionary and a little underrated, low-key. There's so many instances and events that have happened to make the journey of Smash Ultimate that much enjoyable and memorable. The ESR Beak, for example, while being very bad morale for Smash 4, really heightened the security of Smash Ultimate to make sure there's as little information that gets past the Smash team as possible. And that's just one of the many different examples, gamers. Trust me, I'm very good at using the Google button. What the hell is this? Anyways though, I think there's no doubt in any Smasher's mind that one of the best things that came from Smash 4 that would help its future installment Smash Ultimate was definitely the big poll that was introduced back in a Nintendo Direct in April of 2015. This poll allowed us, the fans, to voice our opinions about who we wanted for the DLC of Smash 4, and like everything that's involved with Smash Bros. It got a little toxic. Countless amounts of suggestions and fan wars about various characters from countless different franchises. A whole other topic for a whole other day. Either way, I feel like the Smash Ballot is one thing that I, and I'm sure a lot of Smash fans, would one day love to get a hold of to answer some burning questions we have, such as, A, who were the top 50 fighters? How many votes did each of the fighters get exactly? And who did Darwin bribe to get Banjo-Kazooie so high up on the roster? So today, gamers and gameritas, we're gonna break down what information is 100% confirmed that Sakurai let loose for the public to see. Then, of course, cause you know what this channel is, I'm gonna do some speculation and see if we can find some ground on which other fighters were possibly on that Smash Ballot at the time, based on some interesting decisions that Sakurai chose to do, and see if we can satiate some hunger as to info about this poll, cause I'm starving for info. So let's get into it. Okay, so let's start off what we know about the ballot for an absolute fact. Throughout the development of Smash Ultimate, Sakurai has placed little hints about the ballot results in video presentations, Famitsu articles, interview, and more. Now, first I want to shout out Mondo Mega on Twitter, who was able to document all the known times that Sakurai has referenced the ballot during Smash 4, but mostly during the development of Smash Ultimate. This honestly saved so much time and research. And look, they even say, in case this is a hot topic, now add with an irrelevant YouTuber next to it, and perfect. The first ever reference to the ballot results took place towards the end of development of the Smash 4 DLC, announced in the final video presentation released on December 15th of 2015. This event released quite a few things. A deeper dive of Cloud, who already got revealed a couple months before, complete disappointment, and the release of Bayonetta, in which we got our first inkling of the poll results. Sakurai reveals that Bayonetta was among the negotiable and realizable characters, and said that Bayonetta was the overall #1 choice worldwide. Sakurai also revealed that she ranked top 5 in the US and was the #1 character in Europe. Even now, with reviewing this information, it was kind of surprising. Out of all the characters that people constantly spout that they wanted, and Bayonetta wasn't really a contender that I heard a lot about. And honestly, considering all the wars and petitions that were going on at the time, and with how many other characters were getting their agenda pushed, I'm still to this day shocked beyond belief that she ended up being top 5 in the US. Now, Bayonetta 2 did release in the September of 2014, so the character was still fresh in people's minds, and to be fair, Bayonetta 2 was received pretty positively by fans, but there wasn't much else to think of why the fighter was ranked so high. And you have to understand that she ranked above what is probably thousands of fighter votes that I would have bet my left kidney would have ranked higher than her. Here you go. Now, besides a Bayonetta superfan who bought like 80 computers, there was actually a discovery a couple years after the initial reveal, more specifically in 2018, that maybe explains why she was ranked so high worldwide. Enter in a tweet by Ruben Dow that went and changed everything. Okay, that was like a slight exaggeration. For those who don't know, Lucas, Roy, Ryu, Cloud, and Bayo DLC character slots were added, which was released 2 weeks after Ballot was open. The last character slot to be added was Corrin, and that was done on patch 1.0.8. On 1.0.4, entry 51 was Giga Bowser. On 1.0.6, it was moved to entry 57. All DLC slots except Corrin added. 1.0.8 added Corrin's character slot, moving Giga Bowser to entry 58. According to this, it seems like the slots for Cloud and Bayonetta were actually available to view on patch 1.0.6, released on April 15th, 2015. So what does this mean exactly? Well, friends, this shows that Bayonetta was chosen as early as 2 weeks weeks into the ballot's lifespan. And this also could mean that maybe this early result of the ballot was used for other fighters. But hey, that's just me opening up some options. Now, to this day, we still don't know where she ranks overall, just in the US and Europe. But since Sakurai said she was the first of the negotiable and realizable characters, this most likely means that every other fighter over her in votes were at least from a third party and not a Nintendo-based fighter, which is supported by the other characters that we know ranked above her. Speaking of, let's talk about Sora. Sora, who was later to round off Fighter Pass 2 on October 5th, 2021, was confirmed by Sakurai in an event centered around him to be the most requested character in the ballot.
空が、最も望まれる参戦ファイターであることは分かっていました。6年以上前、スマブラ4の時、スマブラ投稿権というアンケートを行ったのですが、新規参戦希望キャラクターの中でトップだったのが空です。
This lines up with his quote about being a realizable fighter due to the impossible lengths of talking with two companies, one of them being and this is before Disney confirmed that they were being more open with its properties, which would be known to the public a few years later. Overall, not surprising considering that in a fan poll, Sora was hitting top spots consistently in all countries, with him mostly taking the #1 spot. And trust me, we're gonna reference this fan poll quite a lot here, so get used to talking about that fan poll. Banjo-Kazooie, confirmed in Sakurai's final Famitsu article released on November 3rd of 2021, was actually the second most requested character in the ballot, which is not really surprising considering that the fighter outside of Japan has been wanted in Smash since the beginning. What I'm honestly incredibly shocked about is the fact that this big bear boy received less votes in Europe than Hairy Lady. As said with Sora, this makes sense to what Sakurai said about the character being realizable, since working with Microsoft and Rare, two companies that are overseas, would be very tricky to set up in the time frame that was available to them. Now, going back to Bayonetta's reveal during the final Smash presentation, Sakurai also said that Bayonetta was over quote-unquote fighters from previous games in the series. So that means some of the veterans of Smash Bros were also voted quite high in the ballot. Though we don't know by how much or who specifically it was, but we do know that Bayonetta ranked over the veterans. This was most likely the inspiration of the theme Everyone is Here in the next installment, where Sakurai allowed all previous fighters to join the battle. Now, I'm no betting lad, but I'm like 99.9% sure that Snake was one of these characters. I'd bet my right kidney up. Oh wait. Do you accept children? I would also maybe say characters like Ice Climber, Pokemon Trainer, and Wolf were noticeably high as well. But that isn't confirmed, just a speculation of mine. Just want to make that clear. And you know what else is clear? The fact that Ridley was also high in the poll. Oh, look at that. We're talking about the other fighters that were revealed to be high on the ballot. Now, when it comes to these fighters, we don't know anything about their actual placement, but one thing we can pretty much confirm is that these fighters were not over Bayonetta in the polls. At least none of the Nintendo fighters. The only real piece of evidence that is explicitly stated by Sakurai is about King K. Rool in the Famitsu article having quote-unquote a ton of votes, which is very broad. That can literally mean anything. But like I said before, I'm taking any nibbles I can find. But as I said before, this most likely means that while these characters were really high on the ballot, they're most likely still not over Bayonetta and probably in that pile below her. But one character that may have had that ability is the cross thrower himself. This is because in a Famitsu article of Sakurai talking about Simon, he said that Castlevania characters performed really well in the ballot and led him to making Simon, Richter, and even Alucard, who Sakurai said specifically performed really well on the ballot. I assume out of all the characters that Simon would have the highest amount of votes since he is the face of the series, at least to us Nintendo normies. But Alucard was considered to be a fighter specifically due to his popularity, but they ultimately ended up going with Simon. So honestly, we don't know who ranked higher, Simon or Alucard. Now finally we get to the uncertain section, which are characters that weren't directly referenced to the ballot, but the language would imply that these fighters were influenced by the ballot in some way, shape, or form. Chrom and Dark Samus were referenced in this way, as Sakurai in a direct on August 8th, 2018 said that these two fighters were highly requested, but didn't specifically say whether this information was from the ballot or just in general. What makes me think it's the ballot though is the fact that they specified that Chrom was heavily wanted in Japan and Dark Samus was heavily requested in Europe and the Western region in general. Now, sure, they could have gotten this information through general means, but I feel like considering considering that the ballot took place worldwide, specific information like that would be easier to gauge, so there would be something there with those lads. Now remember when I said that Bayonetta and Cloud were two characters that were chosen, in which the proof was the data showing slots for the characters 2 weeks into the ballot being released? Well, there is some speculation to believe that Cloud was fairly high on the ballot as well, for Sakurai to make the executive decision to put him in the game during Smash 4. In an interview with Tetsuya Nomura in 2016, Sakurai mentioned that Cloud had around 1/4 or 1/3 of the requests. Now, like Chrom and Dark Samus, there's no specification on if this is related to the ballot or just general audience want, but once again, since this ballot is worldwide, it had the most accurate information on what people wanted as characters. So I believe for Sakurai to get this exact number, like 1/3, would most likely come from the ballot. With that being said, if this is ballot related, then this would mean Cloud ranked below Bayonetta, as he did manage to get Cloud in the game, making him a realizable choice in the end. So that's pretty much everything we 100% know about the ballots from the little hints and wordings coming from Sakurai himself. Now the question is this: can we speculate and hypothesize forward based on the information and trends to see if we can figure out anything else from the ballot? And you know what? I think we can. And that's what I'm gonna do, because I am bored. So the goal here is to speculate a couple things. 1. Are there any fighters that could potentially be part of the top 5 results of the final poll besides Sora and Banjo? And I'm talking about the overall poll here. And 2. What other fighters that made it in after the announcement of the ballot could have been included due to the outcry of fans? So let's start with the DLC of Smash 4. Now obviously Mewtwo and Lucas don't count since they were announced before the ballot was even a thing, but considering that the ballot results were pretty early on into the lifespan, it once again could have influenced which characters got into the Smash 4 DLC. Starting off with the next batch of fighters we got in the summer of 2015, more specifically June 14th, we got Roy, a popular character that a lot of people requested to be in Smash 4, and Ryu, a surprising pick to say the least. Now if I'm being real here and if I were a betting type of gamer, I would say that these fighters in my opinion were picked regardless of the ballot's inclusion. Similar to Lucas, I think that Roy's inclusion was based on the already existing want from the community to have him included, as Roy is a huge fan favorite when it comes to returning veterans. Almost up there with Mewtwo as some of the most popular returning vets that people wanted. As for Ryu, I get a weird feeling that he was already pre-planned. Maybe it's just that the announcement for him and Roy were pretty close to the ballot announcement, being about 4 or 5 months into the ballot being released, and the development for the fighters would have probably been pretty tight to get them ready for Smash Bros content approaching that came out a little before E3. Also, I feel that while Street Fighter is the poster boy for the fighting game genre, in my perspective, especially at the time, if I'm remembering correctly, I just haven't seen a lot of previous support for the character. I've heard the idea being entertained, but that's about all. So I think those two factors lead me to the conclusion that the fighters were probably coming regardless of the ballot results. But hey, once again, remember that this is all my own speculation, so I could be very well wrong, and I'm completely fine with that. That's just my gut reaction right now is no. Now covering the second half of fighters of Smash 4 is where it gets interesting. We've already talked about Cloud and how he was mostly influenced by the ballot, but what about Corrin? Now look, I know how much you guys love Corrin. I mean, like, he's developed at least 80 people with foot fetishes now. But I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I actually do think Corrin was influenced by the ballot. Why? Well, my friends, because of Japan, the greatest country in the galaxy. This actually relates back to a theory that I heard a while ago based on the last 3 fighters, Cloud, Corrin, and Bayonetta. This theory basically goes that Cloud was the first realizable fighter in America that people voted on to get into the roster. Corrin was the most requested realizable character for the Japanese region, and Bayonetta was the same for Europe. Now, I don't want to get into that too much because that's just tin hat speculation, but I don't see it being entirely far-fetched to say the least. Regardless, I do think that Corrin was heavily requested in Japan, and that's what led to his possible inclusion in Smash 4. And if you look at that popular fan poll created by a Reddit user, Zelk. No, you can't be serious. He had to have used a Scrabble to make that. You'll actually see that Ballot, the newest Fire Emblem character, was actually in the top 5 requested characters in Japan. Now, at the time the ballot came out, Fire Emblem Fates was the newest Fire Emblem game, and while not out yet, I think it could have been possible that the Japanese audience may have voted for Corrin to join the roster, and Sakurai obliged since Corrin would have been relatively easy to get in. And seeing that Corrin was a dragon user, that would excite Sakurai to make a moveset. You know how Fire Emblem characters be. Now, before we continue with this, I just want to put out out a little disclaimer, and that's that these are for the most part theories, meaning that the goal isn't to say that I'm right on any of these, but just offering a different perspective that you may not have thought about before. So if you think a different way and everything that I present from here on out is dumb to you, that's perfectly fine. I really don't care. But all I ask is to at least try to entertain the ideas in your head to see if it's possible in your eyes. That's all. And if not, then click off. I guess, and continue about your day. With that being said, disclaimer over. Let's move on. Now, let's move into Ultimate, the game that literally based a majority of fighters off the ballot alone. Now first, because of when the ballot came out, we can cross off Incineroar, Joker, Min Min, Pyra and Mytha, Byleth, and Piranha Plant. Why? Well, for the Piranha Plant, Sakurai had a different mindset with Piranha Plant that wasn't the ballot, but more so to defy people's expectations instead of making the typical hero/heroine, which you could argue is more of a passion project of sorts rather than the people's choice. And let's be honest, who's voting for a Piranha Plant? Like, come on now. The other fighters came from games that came out past 2015 to the general public, so it would literally be impossible for these fighters to be considered for the ballot. Maybe they were popular, like Ballot for example, who I'm sure was once again heavily requested in Japan, but we're strictly talking about the ballot here, so yeah. Now, I also already talked about Ridley, King K. Rool, the Belmonts, which I have more stuff about them that I didn't mention on purpose. We'll get into that a bit later. Alright, cool. Also, subscribe, or else you don't take showers. But there are a slew of characters that we have no information for if their inclusion was influenced by the ballot or not. So, let's get the speculation going, gamers. So, starting off, we have Isabelle and Inkling, two characters that were introduced during the initial development of Smash Ultimate, and some of the last fighters of the initial Ultimate newcomers that we didn't really talk about. Now, my thing is this. Every fighter besides Incineroar, which was a slot for a new popular Pokemon that Sakurai has previously mentioned that he keeps in mind with every new Smash Bros. Release, has a ballot influence of some kind being included in the roster. Now, looking at Isabelle, it's honestly a toss-up in my mind. On one hand, Animal Crossing New Leaf was a pretty popular game, coming out in 2012, years before the ballot was announced. On top of that, Isabelle in the Animal Crossing universe is a character that a lot, and I mean a lot, of people loved at the time. So it wouldn't be weird to assume that she got a decent amount of votes in the ballot. And with Animal Crossing becoming increasingly more popular as the series goes on, it honestly deserves more reps in general. Now, on the other hand, I think it's safe to say that there was at least some interest in having her as a fighter as early as the development of the Smash 4 DLC when they announced a Mii costume of Isabelle during the Content Approaching Direct. Now, considering that she was one of the only characters, as far as I know, that not only got a Mii costume, but had previously had an assist trophy as well, which tells me that the team had more of an interest in her than other fighters. I could also say the same thing for Inkling, since alongside a Mii costume that got added, the Inkling also got a trophy added later, which is also very strange. Speaking of Inkling, while when you think about it, Splatoon didn't come out until May of 2015, the characters have put on such a good first impression ever since the initial concept was shown in E3 2014 that I would say the Inkling may have gotten a significant amount of votes thrown in. Also, we did get some other interesting costumes of characters like King K. Rool and Prom, two characters that are also likely to have been high on the ballot as well. So honestly, on my conclusion of both these fighters, I would say that it's a combination of both. I think both would have been a likely candidate for appearing in the next Smash installment either way, but the ballot was further proof that this should be a thing. Just reaffirmed in Sakurai's head that yes, they should be considered for adding into Ultimate. Now, just to cover all my bearings, let's talk about Daisy. Now, I think the concept of Echo Fighters mostly inspired her to be in the roster, but I do think that both her and Waluigi probably got a significant amount of votes as well but yeah, I do think both characters may have gotten some agendas pushed for ballot votes. As for Ken, I think it was just the natural progression of things since the concept of Echo Fighters were born. I mean, Ken is probably the most well-known fighting game clone, so I think he would have gotten in regardless of the ballot's results. But honestly, enough about the Echo Fighters. We don't care about that. Let's talk about Hero. Now, I'm not gonna NGL to you guys. If Hero was in fact influenced by the ballot, it is purely by the Japanese audience. Honestly, considering the crazy popularity of the games, especially the third installment, and how Sakurai was talking about the series, saying that it was surreal trying to get these characters in, I can actually see these fighters being at the top 5 of the ballot fighters in Japan. To me, it makes sense that Hero is this popular, and seeing the love that Sakurai put into making the fighter. But hey, it's all just speculation. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, Terry is probably the hardest for me to decide whether his inclusion was influenced by the ballot or not. With Kazuya, it makes sense, especially if we're talking about the ballot towards the end, since Tekken is once again that natural next step after adding a Street Fighter character in the roster. Terry? Honestly, don't even know how to speculate. The only real thing that I could find is that King of Fighters is a very popular series in Latin America, so maybe that could be a region that was considered, and maybe he was of the top fighters in the Ballot of that part of the world. But other than that, I don't really know if Terry was inspired by the Ballot. My best guess is that maybe Terry and the other fighters that missed the letter in his trailer got a significant amount of votes in Latin America, and Sakurai saw the results and chose him based on the different interpretation that he could give Terry. That's my best guess, so don't hurt me. Either that or Sakurai just really likes King of Fighters, which would also make a lot of sense. Now, I know I'm missing a few characters, but let's move on to some other things, shall we? Let's talk about assist trophies and Pokemon. What does this have to do with the Smash Ballot, you may ask? Well, my friends, more than you think is the correct answer here. See, it's actually not that far off to say that Sakurai distributes the data into other avenues of Smash, as he's done this exact same thing before. In previous polls given to us, like the If There Was a Smash 2 poll that was released after the very first Smash Bros, a similar format was done, except it wasn't worldwide, just in Japan. There, while high-ranking characters such as Bowser and Falco made it in his characters, Sakurai uses the results to spread into different aspects of Smash, such as Pokemon like Marill and Togepi becoming Pokeball Pokemon in Melee. So, with that being said, let's start off with Pokemon, because the segment is going to be way shorter than you think. So the problem with this is that a lot of Pokemon are from Gen 7, and the poll came out in 2015. And closed well before the release of Pokemon Sun and Moon, or even the announcement of Pokemon Sun and Moon. It would have been impossible for a large majority of the Pokemon introduced in Ultimate to be influenced by the poll. The only Pokemon introduced that was new and could possibly be a poll influence was Scizor, since he is an outlier in this, and I remember a lot of people talking about wanting Scizor as a Gen 2 representative back when Melee came out. Now, as for assist trophies, I can see a few, more specifically characters that were weirdly focused on, like Waluigi, Shovel Knight, and especially Bomberman. I mean, an assist trophy and a Mii costume? Other characters I can definitely see being high on the ballot are ones like Knuckles, Takamura, Crystal. We've already talked about Alucard, but Alucard as well, Skull Kid, and maybe even Dylan from Dylan's Rolling Western. Now, these just come from speculation on top of characters that I remember people wanting for Smash in the Smash 4 days. Now, you guys have probably noticed, but I did not talk about a specific fighter yet, and there's a specific reason why that is. Now, we've established that there are certain criteria to make it into the top 5 of the ballot. 1, it must have been a third-party character. 2, it can't be a company that Sakurai has not worked with yet in terms of Smash Bros. 3, there must be an outside factor that would have had that fighter be unrealistic to put in Smash 4. With that being said, yes, I wholeheartedly believe that Steve was in top 5. What you gonna do about it, huh, buddy? What you gonna do about it? I'll punch you right here, right now. Also, I just want to say that I believe he was top 5 in what I'll dub the Bayonetta ballot, which is the ballot after 2 weeks, and the final ballot, if there is one, and we're not just basing it off just the one that finished 2 weeks into it. On the worldwide ballot, I believe Steve is top 5 alongside Sora and Banjo. Now, here's the reason why I believe this. Hear me out. First, Sakurai has not worked with Microsoft before, and this obviously makes him a third-party fighter, obviously. And similar to Banjo, Steve being a character that Sakurai would have to discuss with both Microsoft and Mojang, two very unfamiliar companies that are also overseas, which would explain the unrealism of having the character available in the time frame they had. On top of all of that, it was also revealed by Daniel Kaplan, a Mojang business developer, that Steve was talked about to be included in the roster back in 2015. Coincidentally, the year when the ballot got introduced and closed to review the results. I wonder why. What's up with that coincidence, huh? And even on top of that, you guys have to remember that Minecraft wasn't the cool game that the cool kids played back in the day. That would be in later, like 2018, when YouTubers brought the game back. So back then, Steve was actually considered a meme pick, similar to characters like Shrek and SpongeBob, where it wasn't a serious choice, but like those two characters being more of a joke, if anything. So unironically, it could be possible that the people that put Steve there for the memes alone, plus the kids that would vote for him because it is still Minecraft, ended up getting him there to the top alongside those that genuinely wanted him in the game. So with that, if I'm right, I think the characters that were made the top 5 in the US were Sora, Banjo, Steve, some other fighter. My best guess would be like Simon, maybe. That's just a guess. And Bayonetta. In the European ballot, Bayonetta stands at number 1, or at least in the ballot that closed 2 weeks after it was first introduced. But I do think that Steve is in that top 5 as well. In Japan, well, considering that Steve wasn't in the fan poll whatsoever, I'm not very confident to say he was in that poll as a top 5, or maybe even a top 10 for that matter. Either way though, in total, I feel like Steve was in fact part of the top 5 of the worldwide poll because of the Western influence, alongside his brothers Sora and Banjo. So, for those of you guys who are mad that Steve from Minecraft got into Smash Bros, you're mad at his inclusion, it might be your fault for trolling too much in the past. Reflect on yourselves. Be better people. Whether we talk about the Bayonetta poll, the 2-week version, or the final poll, I feel like Steve was in the top 5 in both, eventually leading to his inclusion in Smash Ultimate. And I mean, looking at the popular poll again, he is the top 5 in the US and top 2 in Europe, so honestly, my logic may line up. With all that being said, I really do hope one day we can see the results of the poll like we saw for the If There Was a Smash 2 poll. But honestly, only time can tell, and all we can do is speculate as to who is up there until Sakurai says so. But tell me what you guys think about all of this information that I've just spouted onto y'all. I appreciate y'all guys for watching the video. You can put your spatulas down now, but keep it sizzling, my Baconators.